This is the third specification steering committee meeting for baseline protocol. Welcome everybody. We've got York, we've got Bill, we've got Daniel, we've got Nick and Owen, Arwin, Karen, and Doug. And Doug and Jeff. Doug and Jeff are guests, and they're interested. They can talk about Rhombus a bit, but they were interested in joining, so I invited them as guests. Which I think obviously we need a more formal rule later on. Hopefully that's one of the agenda items for today about how we operate as an SSC. But that's, you know, maybe one rule is that guests are allowed. These are public meetings. I am recording. If anybody has a problem with that, drop off, please. And with that, we'll begin the meeting. I'm going to share my screen, as I like to do. And here we have the agenda. So in case, so projects review and some initial prioritization, and then review SSC draft governance. So we had that action item to do. I think Daniel, among others, we're going to take a crack at that, and we can discuss where we're at that. I would be overwhelmingly surprised and amazed if we had a draft complete at this point, or even ready for straw manning. But if we do, that's great. If we don't, we can turn up the heat on that for next time. Just so you know, the TSC voted to go to 2 weeks from now for the next meeting. So that's, you know, we could probably do the same thing for this. And that's that. Do we have any other agenda items that folks want to bring up? I think we lost Karen there for a second, or maybe my screen's just, no, there's, yeah, oh, there you are. Yeah, and there's Stefan. And Arwin's there. So yeah, okay, good. My screen was only showing a couple of people. Okay, do we have other agenda items? Give a few minutes to discuss that. I'll just go around the room. York, do you have anything that you'd like to discuss today?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, Bill?
No, my present path of development in baseline is addressing some getting the front end up and operational. So it's not really the domain of this meeting.
Right on. Daniel?
No, I think that this is good.
Okay. Yeah, these are two big topics. So it's Nick?
I'm good, thanks.
Owen?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, we're having a good discussion about messaging on the Slack, but at some point I'd like to move it into the specification, into the GitHub epics. I want to make sure we all land first, but that's it. Depending on it being for this or not.
Arwin?
I'll sit on my side. Thanks.
Hey, Owen. I'd be interested in participating in the messaging discussion and making sure that obviously it's being captured somewhere besides Slack. Is it going into a document?
Yeah, I think the plan is to basically get an alignment and then start putting the high level things into the epics in ZenHub, and then working our way out from there. But I think we might need to have a call at some point just to make sure we're all actually on the same page and working towards the same implementation type. So if you're happy to participate, York, I'll invite you to the call when we have one.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And let me PSA something from the previous meeting on the TSC. We came up with this protocol, loose protocol for this, and that is we can create projects all we want in ZenHub. ZenHub projects, in other words, these projects, high level, like healthcare opportunities, TSC and maintainer governance and stuff, we can do those with impunity because they don't show up in the issues. They don't clutter up the GitHub repo. epics underneath them do. They become issues with an epic label in GitHub standard. And we need to get starting on pipelining those things. And then you can create epics and stories underneath it. So everybody here should, anybody on the SSC, and this is part of being on the SSC, is you should have access to create these and edit them. And so if anyone does not, let me know, because we are debugging the user permissioning. And I've identified already at least one person who should have the ability to do that doesn't. But at this point, folks should have it. Bill, double check and let me know if that's not the case.
Yeah, I have access now.
Okay. I'll spare everybody the details, but it just had to do with how we set up GitHub permissions. And so that's that. And so the loose protocol is create an epic for your thing, like messaging, and then use that single item as a big doc, basically Google Doc with commenting and stuff to flesh out the project in a single epic. And then once it's been chunked out with good headers, we can turn those into epic stories and issues or tasks. Does that sound right to everybody? So just to repeat, the simple thing is you can, find a big level, high level, project level topic. If you don't see one that's appropriate, go ahead and create one, no big deal. We can discuss it at the next SSC meeting. Ultimately these SSC meetings will be, one of the features of them will be a segment of just kind of going through and looking at the big topics and going, should we be highlighting this one or that one, in this period of time? And that's it. And they would, if you only have one epic underneath it, and that epic is clearly under construction with a bunch of comments going on, and it hasn't kind of, exploded yet into a bunch of real epics, stories, and tasks, then we know that it's still cooking. Seem right? Seem clean? Seem simple?
Yep.
And I guess that's the punchline from the TSC discussion. I wouldn't say that we have even rough consensus on it, but we discussed the notion of which mess do we want to have? Do we want to have a single repo mess or a multiple repo mess? And I think for now, if I'm reading the tea leaves right, and I'm saying it that way because I don't think I have a right to say that the TSC agreed on this. I don't think I could rightly say that we agreed on it yet, but I feel that it felt to me like the general warp and woof of the conversation was that we're going to stick with one repo for now. We're just going to try to manage those epics. Bear in mind that epics show up in the engineers' lives as issues with an epic label, and too much of it creates a lot of clutter, which is something we want to avoid. Okay, so that's that. Let's see, I skipped over. So Owen, Arwen, Karen, any topics?
No, none from my side.
Got it. I've got one I'm going to ask you about later about use cases, but for now, and Doug and Jeff, do you want to bring up anything about Rhombus, or are you just here to listen and learn?
Yeah, here to listen and learn, and thank you for having us.
No, you're welcome.
Hi, John. This is Steve Short from BP.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, sorry for joining late. I just wanted to comment on your single repo versus multi-repo mess.
Yes,
I have a lot of experience with that. The best case for splitting repos is generally to treat it as a security boundary. So, I mean, aside from clear project splits between repos, if you want to permission things differently, then split it out between repos. If you have generally the same user base amongst code, parts in a repo, then that's where it works best.
I think that's well said, and I'm glad we're recording it. We'll memorialize that. I agree, and I think that's probably another reason why we're sticking with one for now.
Cool.
At least I think we are. Yeah. So, and there may be an update to that after the next TSC meeting. Okay, so Stefan, anything from your side? Any other agenda items?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Thanks.
The draft governance. Oh, no, that should go up top. So let's talk about draft governance for starters and give that some good time. Daniel, do you want to say anything about that?
I'm sorry, about the draft governance?
Yeah, like we were talking last time about having writing down some rules of the road and some guidelines for how we're going to operate, how you get to be an SSC person, why you'd want to be one, what's the role, we have a nice clean one for TSC. We do not have one for SSC.
Sure. So, I'll just take the blame for that one. I think I dropped the ball on that. I wasn't sure if that was, that was something that we're going to be working on. I guess the focus was on the other epics, but I'd be happy to pick that up this week. Yeah,
that's all good. And I will take the ultimate blame for that. I didn't push on it. So why don't you and I work on that for next week, and we can promulgate it or we can get it to everybody. Even if we don't have a meeting next week, we can get it to everybody by next week. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I have a couple of ideas. There's some documents that we can jumpstart off with.
Does anybody else want to have in on that, or does anybody have a passion about that document? Okay. You and me, Daniel.
Let's do it.
Okay, priorities for the coming weeks. Real world integration, or before we move on, what are people's thoughts about high level thoughts that we can, let's get 10 minutes to discuss how we want to govern the SSC. Let's get those in so that we can have some grist for the mill. York, what are the burning topics that for you? This is the specification committee.
Which item are you on? Are you talking about the governance?
Yeah,
now?
draft governance, right? So one of the things that I'll just prompt.
Yeah, but
how what constitutes getting to be on the SSC? What is this? We decided that the SSC is an accordion style membership, right? Unlike the TSC, which is a fixed number.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to need to write down some guidelines about how to balance that.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously the people on an SSC, you want people who are contributors, right?
Not necessarily contributors to the repo. They could be companies that have agendas that they're pushing, right?
Yeah, no, I was thinking about it from the other perspective, which is people like to be named on things, right? And they often, want to get named on things, but actually not contribute. So that was sort of the point that I was making. Like, there's got to be some minimum bar of like why.
Yeah. So there's there needs to be a standard of participation.
Yeah.
And if you don't match that standard, then right.
And so sort of in line with that, we may make a decision that it's okay that someone joins, but then they're not really contributing, in which case we would want to welcome them to depart.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. I think one tangible thing that will make that makes being on the SSC a thing is you will get a right to, you'll get a user permissioning level, and we're working on this on the TSC, a permission level of at least read access, and that will allow, which is above view, and that allows you to edit and be assigned to epics and that sort of thing. If you don't have that level of permissioning, then you're not actually in the core, and if you're not in the core, then you can't create, edit, or delete issues or epics or projects.
Who has view? Is that what's controlled by the GitHub repo permissions?
View is, yeah, everybody, that's a public layer. Everybody has view access.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So view equates to public.
Yes, and then read or write. Write is what all the maintainers and, yeah, actually write is what the maintainers have. No, maintain is what the maintainers have. Mm-hmm. Contributors have write, and one of the things we're struggling to do is get a reasonably quick process for people who want to contribute to get write access. And then read access is, anyway, we're dealing with the permissioning mess right now. That's a different track. We're doing that now. But SSC will have that. If you're on the SSC team, that means that you have a higher level of permissions than the public. Anything else on this topic?
Maybe that's a bar of contribution. Like, just as like, if you come on to the SSC, that's great, we welcome you, but then we sit and wait for you to request read access, right? If you never request read access, then you're not, in some ways you're not contributing, right?
Yeah.
You're no different than the public.
I think that's a great test, York, of people's seriousness.
Yeah. Like I want to get my hands on the keyboard, right? That's different than the public, right? The public's just reading or just viewing, right?
So the contributing group, the contributors, and I don't mean the contributor like what you're describing, but contributor to the repo and maintainer group is the engineering core that's actually building stuff. Yeah. The TSC governs that. The SSC, if you're on the SSC, it means that you're driving an agenda, right? It means you've picked a project or two or some number, and you are like for example, if BP might say, energy, cases in energy, we're going to promote those, we're going to drive them, we're going to see them happen, we're going to incentivize them where that's possible. Or at least rally the flag, right? So it's the to me, if somebody's saying to me do this, then you're an SSC member, and you should either put up a project or collaborate with another group. So for example, Jeff and Doug are here. We have system integration and Oracle work with a variety of companies already. And they would join that initiative, right? Mm-hmm. They wouldn't necessarily create a new project because we already have a project on the topic.
Sure.
But they would add their heft to it.
So yeah, maybe a few thoughts from a sort of pure, if you will, end user enterprise perspective, right? I think that's where the lines blur a little bit on how far we actually can have teams contributing to an actual, say, touching keyboard, adding stuff to GitHub and so forth, versus being quite enough busy and thinking about how to integrate this whole thing. And you're right. I mean, when we look into adoption of open source, then there is the first question: does this have a vivid, environment where it's assured that functionality is granted moving forward? Then do I have a way to shape the evolution of it? And I think, well, at least that's where I was thinking my role would be, to kind of, be in that shaping the evolution towards the adoption versus towards the development. So in between, right? And I just, because I think we will make different type of commitments than a systems integrator does or a development shop does. And I just want to make sure we can accommodate that kind of demographic.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say the same. The lines get blurred and the level of participation might look different.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. What would you, so I'm just trying to grok or understand what you're both saying, because I think I'm, to some extent, I hear myself a little bit coming from the same place. But if you were to define, Karen, because I think Stefan did a little bit already, what type of contribution would be a good qualifier?
Let me think on it. I hesitate to give a complete definition now without really focusing on what is and isn't included, but the businesses that are often targeted, just they don't operate in the building of open source environments like this, so the contribution to how they get billed hasn't really been defined yet. And yeah, that just needs some more thought behind it before I really give a complete answer on kind of segmenting where collaboration starts in the beginning versus where it evolves to.
I mean, I think if you think about some of the discussions we've had, like the messaging discussion, right? I mean, that started with conversations which evolved to, hey, I think it's this, right? To, you know, an email exchange, you know, sort of writing down ideas, right, about that particular topic, to the point where I think it's getting to now, which is, you know, putting something into an artifact of some form. And then I think maybe there's an opportunity once it's in artifact form for contributors who might be like editors or reviewers from a enterprise requirements perspective to say, yeah, yes, no, I don't agree with this, or I do, or we need to tweak this a little bit. Is that a, so that's sort of like a journey, right? Does that fit within the framework of what you're referring to, Karen?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think, can I just take it offline and put some more thoughts down? Because it is, I mean, even the position I'm in now on the team, there's things that, you know, I really have to validate within the responsibility that I do have to take back internally, that I make sure I'm relaying the right information, and also you know, respecting the fact that we are working on some things that we wouldn't discuss yet, basically.
Sure.
So that delineation is important, but I do believe more and more as we go forward, it's going to get blurred, but just it's something I need to clarify now before giving too much detail to it.
Sure, absolutely.
And,
I mean,
I would just add that Karen and myself and Daniel are still working on that business value sort of artifact, right? That we picked up last week, right? And so it's still a work in progress there. We just started last week, and so there's maybe that artifact gives us a little bit of an idea, right? What that would look like. I think what I generally would be looking for is just talk about, you know, what the boosters and busters are, right? I mean, you know, where do I see the big impediments, and where do I see the big, you know, the big hallelujah, right? The big thing moving forward. And so it might be that thing on top of the epics that start sort of, you know, connecting them, tying them together in a way where you can actually really in a much more straighter line get towards, you know, what a business can actually drive from it, or a business in its B2B space can drive to it. And then the other thing to think about is, John, you mentioned DSCSA last time. So naturally, right, there are these sort of private consortium-based blockchain, things going, and the entire business is being built with it, right? And I think maybe it would be also wise, maybe there's even a different group that needs to form, right? That's the equivalent of sort of like the business development / marketing roles, right? To really, get a sense of what else out there is going down the path that we all feel we need to leave to mainnet, right? And see where they can be picked up. And if that's the case, out of a sudden you start interacting with not, individual enterprises, you start interacting with already built sort of, groups of enterprises.
I'm very encouraged by what you just said there, Stefan. I was just thinking as Karen and York were talking, that the role of the center point of all of this is, which is nominally the TSC and the SSC, and I guess myself is right now as the provisional chair, is to create a context in which many people, not everybody, but many people feel strongly and have energy towards identifying things that the center isn't thinking about and doing stuff, right? And so and saying, hey, that has to happen, and then just going and getting it done, right? Imagine if Ethereum only operated when the couple of the founders decided to do something, it wouldn't be what it is. So that's the mark of health for for baseline is that, right? That people are generating light and heat. For example, from your guidance, you've got Balaji, who is now a maintainer candidate because he's stepping up to build something against healthcare. I should hope, having said what you said, it starts to generate some attention towards biz dev and marketing, and maybe somebody just steps up and starts to lead that. So that, and I think one of the jobs of the SSC is to make sure that we are creating a context or an environment where that ecosystem is healthy.
Yeah, John, I would just add there is I think it will be quite a different biz dev and marketing role than we may be used to, right? Because this plays into this external space, right? Like where enterprises are forming already these consortiums, and in there, have to already their own governance systems by which they make decisions, right? And so I think, as I said, I don't know what the answers are. I just feel there is something new there in the way you bootstrap this, because this is not open source that then goes into an enterprise. This is open source that then goes between enterprises, right? And that just has a wonderful but challenging different dynamics, right? So.
Yeah, I guess just to comment on all that, I think that's something that we should be conscious of as we go through the draft governance, because as individuals are contributing their ideas and their methodologies and their best practices and the lessons learned, it turns into something that the greater community is going to be able to leverage, where maybe some of these lessons learned are something that has is a strategic advantage for a specific company. So I definitely can respect that viewpoint.
Yeah, and I want to reflect on what Stefan just said, which around open source between enterprises. That is one of the biggest interesting challenges of any of this work that we've been experiencing, that we'll experience here, and we have been experiencing in the context of enterprise blockchain consortia, is that you are standing up a new open source technology with very interesting patterns that enterprises know little about, right? And then on top of that, you're saying, well, now we're going to actually share data in a way that we haven't shared data before. And oh, by the way,
are we? I mean, isn't the point that we're saying share data the way you're used to and use the mainnet as the rails, right?
Yeah, no, I think that actually I think that is a difference in what we've traditionally seen in enterprise blockchain, which is enterprise blockchain is, you know, you're typically looking at you'll do the same thing here, but the implementation is different. You're right about that, John, right? But you still have to do a data privacy matrix to look at who do you share what with, who has permission on what sets of data. Arwen knows this. Arwen knows this well because he's been down this path also. And then you're also dealing with now essentially a shared workflow across multiple enterprises with a shared SLA that has dependencies on each of those enterprises and their IT teams to keep their systems running. And so the word multi-party is a very comprehensive term, right? That is very different than a lot of things that we do currently.
One point I'd like to surface here is that if we're thinking about the
And Bill, we can hardly hear you, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, you're very faint.
Is this any better? I'll have to call in to make any contributions, I guess.
No, you're loud enough now. If you just speak as loud as you can.
So if we're thinking of the organization as the top layer of the stack, and we have the specification steering committee in the middle and the technical specification committee below, we're looking for some way to take the organization's guidance for the specification steering committee to provide guidance for the technical steering committee. And one thing I think we can do at the specification steering committee level is define assessment metrics and acceptance criteria. So for example, if we determine that something like Whisper is suboptimal, what are the metrics we're using to assess performance? And then what are the acceptance criteria for improving upon what is currently in our stack?
So
we're looking to contribute specifically along the ZK assessment criteria and the ability to improve upon some of the components of the ZK layer. But to do that, we need some acceptance assessment metrics and acceptance criteria.
Yeah, and this once again speaks to the hopefully the role of this community to raise the heat level on things like Socrates and other components becoming production ready rather than research, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And in the case of you mentioned Whisper, right? Like there are definitely criteria around that we would that we think are important, right?
Oh, hey, speaking of which, you brought up the data privacy matrix and shared SLA. I wrote the note down here on the screen.
Yep.
Is that a tool opportunity? And when I wrote tool opportunity, I was reminded that next time, so the CEO and one of the chief technologists of Truffle have asked to join the SSC. And again, we need a formal procedure. I told them, yeah, show up, but it'd be nice to be able to say, yes, this is how you become that, and it's really easy, and yes, you can. So we'll get that document done this week. But what was very encouraging was that all we've been hearing about is baseline, and I don't want to speak for them, but that was a thing that I heard on the call.
Yeah, I was actually on the phone with the Truffle guys last week, and it's interesting. Tim and Wes were on, and Tim's description of baseline was completely wrong. so I had to politely correct him in the conversation we were having. But
well, he must have learned because he got it right on our call, so that's good.
Yeah, it was a good opportunity to give them the 1 or 2 sentence talking point.
Yep. Yeah. So not only, I mean, these guys are busy and they're the ball, and they wanted not just one person here, but 2. That tells you a lot.
So the data privacy matrix today I've developed a spreadsheet that we use, but I think there's an opportunity to improve upon that. You know, potentially there's more that we could do with that. And one of the questions we're actually dealing with right now, specific to data privacy matrix, and this is in the context of a private consortium that's running Quorum with private transactions, so therefore private chain transactions. The question is, again, among the parties who are participating in the consortium, is how do you prove to me that my data is not where it shouldn't be?
This is reminiscent of what you said. You mentioned on the last call, so that's probably a good signal that this is an important project topic to me. Oops.
Yeah. In this case, it's a private chain environment, so it's a little bit different, but I think it still has the same requirement from an enterprise perspective, right?
Right. Where it shouldn't be.
So another thought that just goes to my head as I'm listening to you guys is maybe back to Bill as well. There is somewhere this functional, non-functional kind of divide, and it's always funny. Like we always say, you know, the upper layers non-functional or functional becomes the upper layers non-functional becomes the under layers functional, right? And so I think there is this very, in my mind, welcomed kind of avenue in which sort of like a business representation with say Ethereum savviness, you know, can speak to, versus we're just a business voice for purely, you know, capability kind of thinking, you know, mindset. And I think it's translating from these, you know, upper layers to sort of requirements or assessment criteria, right, for a decision to be made in the layer below. And I think that's a cascade that might be interesting to follow, and you're arriving at maybe you need to have the SSCs with chapters, right, for, you know, maybe 4 or 5 major buckets, right? You know, and maybe that helps as well to structure the many people that bring in different interests to this.
I think you're going to see that actually organically happen, especially when we go from, as you know, we decided as a team to not break up into different verticals yet, but there's going to be a point where that's an obvious thing to do, right? And when that does happen, I think you're going to see a lot of that kind of divisionalization of the SSC.
Well, I didn't mean the breakup on vertical, John. I meant the breakup in these many sort of things underneath, right? You mentioned messaging. You know, I will be coming in with identity. More like all these things, right? So.
No, yeah, the variety of kind of compartmentalizations will start to occur, both vertical and horizontal. I agree. And I think that when we start to see that happen, I think we've met another milestone in terms of the health of the community. I'm gonna move us to the next topic, unless without dissent. Priorities for the coming weeks. Let me propose something here. I've been doing some thinking, and you know, trying to think of, you know, what is the 1 or 2 or 3 things that we need to focus the community on as best as we can to have health and vitality in the community. Certainly things like people stepping up and creating interesting POCs in just under a week or 2 is pretty cool. I know that Arwen and team are continuing to work on Radish and the extension of that. That's pretty cool. But you know, when you net it all out, in the next couple of weeks, we really want to, and fortunately, companies like you know, Unibright and Chainlink and others are on this already, and Daniel's team as well, Envision, real world integrations. We've got to see somebody do more than just you know, an onboard Mongo database to an onboard Mongo database. So there are some big names that we're meeting with this week that we're hopeful will join. the SSC as well in this space, and multiple ones, not just one. And so I'm hopeful that and that we can, as I think was brought up earlier, as we do some marketing, and that marketing is heavily about evangelism to leaders and influencers, that we will wind up with the first thing that we really need is to be able to show, to announce, hey, these two things integrated on this POC in this way. And that the second thing that we need to really get focused on is the spec doc, a living, so there's a document in the docs site, docs.baseline-protocol.org. There's a section called specification or standards. And in that, it's kind of just a shell right now. So getting to heavily to work on the specification is definitely, that is the nature, that is exactly what this team is called, Specification Steering Committee. So getting that living doc started and starting to say, okay, it needs to have this, must have that, shall not have that. Those two things seem to me to be the highest priority items at a very high level. And then the third and fourth are use cases, like the one, we identified 2 or 3 things that we didn't do in the POC, for the Radish 34 POC, that are logically things that ought to be in the spec. And so the more we can do that kind of mental work of saying, well, what if we applied it to this? Well, it would need this and this and this. Are any of those missing in the current implementation, even if that implementation needs some work? Yeah, this one and this one are not in there. Now we've added to the spec. And in a way, that spec becomes an MRD, or a marketing requirements document, as we used to call them. And only then does heavy work on abstraction and generalization into a true baseline reference implementation make sense. So the 3 on top, I would say, are multi-threaded, and that while there won't be no work on abstraction and generalization, the main thrust of that work comes as the other 3 mature. This is my straw man. I present it to you. Please discuss.
I guess if I could just add, it's not 100% with what you were just talking about, John, but it's similar to, I just added the pull request number 96 for the NFR questionnaire. I guess it's not the must need, but it's a series of questions that you can use as kind of a jumping board. It'd be great to get everyone's opinion on that. So I guess once that's merged to master, right, everyone's going to have the opportunity to edit it, change it, or do anything like that. Yeah, I see that you're writing the functional side, right? So I'm just taking a look at the NFR side. It'd be great to get the functional side in there as well. It's not in the specifications document, but it's just under the docs.
Right on. Yeah, I think it's probably time that we can start. Well, actually, that's a question. Do we want to use the living, the docs folder in the repo when you merge it goes into the docs website through Gitbook. So we could, anybody who wants access. If anybody wants Gitbook access because of the way it works, I want to make sure you're well trained on it and know the rules of the road, because you can do damage by accident with that access. But if you want to have direct access through Gitbook, we can talk about that. But anybody can can write to the docs simply by doing writing to the .md files in the docs folder. So we could go straight into that, Daniel, and start working collectively on that. Or we could maybe strawman it into a Gitbook or a Google Doc or something like that to stage it before we put it in there. I think like to try just going straight into .md because it removes a step. But
so my quick thought on here, and I'd love to hear everyone's opinion, is I don't necessarily, you know, this is just me just being completely open and honest and real. I don't want to say that whatever I merged over here into the repo is a representation of everyone's thoughts that's sitting on the SSC, right? So to put it straight to the docs might be missing a step where we can get some really valuable feedback by, you know, just kind of putting into the staging queue, if you will.
good point. So you're saying let's do a Google Doc and get all the SSC members on it.
You can do it through Google Doc or like I was saying, right, we can put it into the repo. That way we can show kind of, you know, the SSC going back and forth, right? We're making edits and things like that, right? And it's kind of, you know, it's kind of getting everyone involved, everyone getting credit for putting in edits and things like that.
Hi, this is Steve Short again. Practices I've followed on open source projects in the past is to associate technical documentation, user documentation, along with, you know, code complete and code review, all part of a card being done. So the definition of done includes documentation, and without that, the code isn't considered done. Code review includes documentation review, and it all goes together in the MD and the code and the merge all at once.
That's exactly right. Although in this case, Steve, we're talking about a specification, which changes the rules a little bit, right?
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, the spec may have no code at all involved, but we want to be able to say, are these the requirements that we're prioritizing?
My general feeling is technical people don't like to write docs, and MD lowers the barrier to docs enough that you can get technical people to write them. Google Docs plus an MD might introduce a wrinkle just for, you know, awareness.
All right, let's stick with what Daniel's suggesting. Does anybody dissent with that? Then we just use the, it's still in Markdown, right?
Correct.
Daniel?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Does anybody have trouble working with Markdown?
So what we're doing, John, is we're just going to do the specification in Markdown and make sure then it's going through the review process before it actually gets merged into master.
Yeah, and it sounds like what Daniel's saying is that before we do the official, we can have sort of an intermediate item. So in this case, item number 96 in the repo is that's not a pull request, is it? It's an issue, isn't it?
It's in as a pull request. It's not yet merged to master.
Okay. So I see. So what you're saying is we work off of that. Is that a branch?
It was a branch, yeah.
So we could create a specifications staging branch. Let's do that. Specification staging branch, and let's do that directly in the docs. I'll take this offline and provide a link. Daniel, I'll work with you on that.
Sure.
That's a good idea, right? So we have that specs branch. It won't mess with master. It won't get into the docs, the actual published docs, until we all kind of feel like it's baked enough to do.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable with it first.
Yeah, but it means the merge to master can be controlled by the team with actual maintaining privileges as well, which is useful.
Very well. Any dissent? Okay. We're closing in on the end of the hour. So any other further discussion about that? So I guess what that means is, on a practical basis, is everybody should be focused on encouraging real-world integration, thinking about how they can promote real-world integration. Daniel and I will get you the link you need to start weighing in on specification. Maybe budget yourself a little bit of time this week or next week to get in there and poke around in those docs and make some comments and add your thoughts. Let's start promoting some use cases. As I said, there's a guy working on a healthcare use case right now. Arwen, I thought maybe we could close with Arwen and Karen and Steve as domain experts, as well as in terms of we talked a lot about healthcare last time. Let's talk about what Ernst & Young sees as a as the use case that's cooking up with Radish, and also what we could be thinking about in terms of energy.
So for us, we've been focused primarily around the supply chain, which is why also with Paul having a lot of experience in supply chain, we focus Radish around the procurement aspects of that. We are, as EY, taking that further to address beyond POs, invoices, and ultimately settlement, because we do see with this plus tokenization really gives us the building blocks to foster a more DeFi ecosystem. So getting the likes of Maker and others involved, I think would really be transformative and help push forward mainnet. I do think as a specifications committee, there's a lot to do there with regards to defining what are the specs for how we actually address settlement and also leverage baseline for that. So just again, thinking about the broader ecosystem. I do think it's also important that we don't fragment too early. I know we discussed this before, but my view for blockchain, if we do this well, is that we are able to build multiple solutions, right, that will be interoperable with one another. Some of that involves adhering to certain standards, and I don't know if we've locked this in yet either, but that's something else that we should probably revisit, is on what are the standards that we are looking to push forward under the Ethereum ecosystem, or whatever the mainnet is that we end up leveraging.
That's great, Arwen. What are your thoughts about the challenges of going from, say, the POC to invoice? Are there projects that we need to do as a community to help make that a good, I know the next step is to add the ability to do invoices and to do manufacturing tracking, right?
Yeah, so I think some of it is again around establishing the standards that the broader community will want to adopt. So, and some of that's the formats of the data that's going to be transacted amongst the members of the ecosystem. So this is the data that we need to structure a PO or an invoice. A lot of what we've done in tokenizing a PO already lays the foundation for being able to do similarly with an invoice, right? But that ultimately we want to get to a place where we can do three-way matching, right, and do that on chain, right? Does the goods that were delivered to me match what was on the invoice, right? And that matches what I initially wanted to order in the PO, and does it all adhere to the terms of our contract with one another? If so, and those three things match, then I can issue payment, right? But it would be nice to do that in a standard way because we all do it across different supply chains. And this is why it's important that we find a way to do that together, so that we're not building 5 different ways to do procurement, right? There's really a lot that's in common, more so than there is that's different.
We don't have a lot of time for it, but I'd like to point you to this, if you can still see the screen. That would be a good place to put another project, is to say, move, get, in fact, there might already be one here on that. ZK, no, we didn't get that one in yet. So we could put one in around that subject. And by the way, I should say that I'm hearing a lot of conversations that basically terminate in, hey, wouldn't it be cool if somebody created a ZOC library that governed this process, that would be regulatory compliant and auditable. So I have to think there's a real opportunity for the auditing companies, in particular E&Y, for creating those libraries and certifying them.
Yeah, so we do have some other work that we've done parallel to baseline around our recent Nightfall updates, and and the most recent one has a KYC component. So it's well, Nightfall is great and can enable not so pleasant things like money laundering. We want to still offer the ability for auditors and necessarily regulatory bodies to be able to access data where they need to, in order to conduct audits. So that is an update that recently went into Nightfall. So feel free to check that out as well.
Right on. Well, we're very close to the top of the hour. I'll say I'll let us dribble over a little bit if people can stay on for a couple of minutes, and maybe we can give some time to Karen and Steve about the same subject. I mean, what are your thoughts on projects that are relevant to the use cases and that sort of thing? And maybe you're not in a place yet where you can talk about them. I know you said that before.
Karen, do you want to go first or me?
Sure, I can speak to that. There's certainly a lot in oil and gas that's already out there. I think the traditional supply chain use cases have come up time and time again. There's different consortiums for post-trade processing, particularly we're a part of VACT, which is built on Quorum. So I think it's in the energy transition, there's a lot of opportunity for things that support greener initiatives and lower carbon initiatives out there. And right now in energy, I mean, again, just speaking from the background of an operator, it's about cost savings in a very big way. We're kind of in an unprecedented time. So just as larger context from the business perspective, that's really where we're sitting now. I think we were, as an industry, a place that among every other, we got a lot of early education and approaches on just blockchain technology as a whole because of the large opportunity within it. And now it's figuring out what's the step path to move forward, because you can't boil the ocean, but now that there's less ability to, I would say, there's just more of an emphasis on making the right things work quickly. I'll put it that way. So that's really the challenge that we're facing at this point, just as a whole. So I know that's very general, but in terms of market context, I think that's not unlike what a lot of other industries are feeling at this point. So it's worth saying that just that complete picture of how things are going to look short, medium, and long term is really important.
I'd love to see, I think it'd be very exciting to find a pattern that says, this is a thing that the energy sector needs to do, or the company A and company B are compelled to do even in these tough times, that involve multiple parties, where not all the parties can know everything about everything all the time in that workflow, yada, yada, yada. It's basically, that looks like a baseline pattern, but that will save money because they're compelled to do it anyway, and this would be less expensive way to do it. That would be exciting.
Right, exactly, I agree.
Steve, you want to have the last word there? I know you had some thoughts. Thank you.
So
Karen.
I'm sort of in the bowels of IT. I'm not in a business-facing function where I'm in IT-facing functions, and we're exploring opportunities about assurance of data between IT teams, particularly off towards audit type actions. So as in when EY or another auditor comes to audit our activities, how we could provide baseline assurance of what we're doing without having just to spend hours and hours and hours of pulling logs and screenshots and such. So sort of building this into the DNA of all of our IT processes back and forth between IT teams.
Well, that sounds pretty exciting. And more proof that my old line still holds, which is every line of code is a business decision, and every business decision that doesn't understand the code is probably a bad one.
I agree with that.
So, and with that, I guess if there's nothing else, we can adjourn. We'll come back 2 weeks. Is that okay for everybody, or does anybody strongly feel like we need to go next week?
I think a 2-week cadence is good.
Very well. We'll do that. And I will endeavor to get with folks one-on-one and maybe in small groups. Let's try to keep the momentum going, even if we're not meeting. And, you know, that really comes from us. So you know, get out there, get on Slack, tell people, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? You know, let's see if we can get some focus on these projects. And if everybody could look at the projects and start to help prune and tune those this week, that would be awesome. And I'll put out a note about that. And with that, I think we can adjourn. Has anybody got anything left? Last word? All right. Talk to you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you, John.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.